Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath Rome's moonlit cornices and along corridors where bronze hinges remember hands that no longer live, and we stop before a pair of doors whose silence grows louder than any trumpet. Torches hiss, fountains murmur, a stray dog pads past marble feet that belong to long-dead senators, and there tucked in the city's beating heart stand the gates that Romans once treated as a public barometer for the fate of the world. They are not merely heavy, they are ceremonial, theatrical, reportedly edged with iron, and sheathed in bronze so thick that a mason could rap them with a hammer and feel the knock echo in his wrist. To stare at them at night is to feel both the chill of old metal and the warmth of a story that refuses to cool. Yes, these are the gates people later call cursed sealed so long that 15 centuries slide by like lamplight across a polished floor, and still no one sees them swing. You probably won't survive the guard's paperwork if you try opening them yourself, so let's agree to stand at a respectful distance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this little night owl map light up. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. They call them the Gates of Janus, a shrine tucked near the Forum, where the god of thresholds Janus, with one face peering forward and the other looking back, receives the city's nervous glances. Mainstream fact in Rome's public ritual, those doors stand open during war and close during peace. If the hinges gape, soldiers tramp through the arch, as if the city itself exhales aggression. If the leaves are shut, Rome claims it needs no swords tonight. It sounds tidy, like a simple toggle switch for an empire. But Rome, which spends centuries behaving like the world's most ambitious neighbour, seldom finds occasion to shut anything except tax ledgers. The joke on the street, at least in later retellings, is that the peace door is the most underemployed worker in Italy. Still, the gates close at moments that glare like coins in the sun. Augustus Octavian, fresh from civil war and keen on optics, boasts that he shuts them not once, not twice, but 3 times, inviting the city to imagine a future where legions can nap. Historians still argue whether every closure he claims matches reality or rhetoric. The sources squint, the numbers wobble, and somewhere a Senate stenographer sighs. Yet the ritual matters. A closed door under Augustus is not quiet metal. It is propaganda you can knock on. The clang tells citizens that the storm has passed, and also that the captain intends to keep steering. Now tilt your head and listen for the whispers that collect in old stone. After the Empire's reins slip and the West stumbles, the gates settle into a long sleep. Generations pass. Whole neighbourhoods rise and fall. A basilica eats one market. A market gnaws at a temple. Children grow old, repeating rumours about doors they never see move. A quirky tidbit clings to the shrine like ivy. A medieval note claims that crows avoid perching on the lintel, when the doors are shut, circling as if the air above the threshold is somehow too crowded with unseen things. Believable? That depends on how you feel about bird critics. But the image sticks a feathered hesitation over a human fear. What makes the silence eerie is not only its length, it's the way the city leans on symbol. Romans treat thresholds as places where fate pauses to tie its sandals. Wedding doors, shop doors, temple doors, and this door which pretends to swing the world. Closing it in a city built for marching is like placing a hand over a trumpet's mouth. You can feel the note that is not played. And because humans are experts at turning absence into omen, the sealed leaves gather stories like fishermen gather nets. People say that if anyone forces them open after so long, the hinge will shriek, and the shriek will call trouble like a bugle. People say the opposite too, because rumour enjoys variety. If they ever open again, the bellies of wars will empty and peace will spill out like wine. The city keeps both prophecies on the shelf the way you keep both honey and vinegar in your kitchen, ready for whatever the day demands. Measure the space with your own body. The portal stands roughly the height of 2 tall men stacked about 4 metres, which is roughly 13 feet, and as broad as a pair of litters carried side by side. The jambs feel chill even in summer. An iron crossbar slides into sockets worn smooth by centuries of ritual fingers. Priests have touched those sockets with oil and ash. Soldiers have brushed them with the backs of their hands, superstitious in the way professionals always are when their lives involve metal and luck. When the doors are open, the shrine reads like a mouth mid-syllable. When closed as it is in our long tale, it reads like a clenched jaw. The city learns to live around the clamp. Emperors come and go, some through triumphal arches, some through back doors, some in ways polite narration will not detail at bedtime. The gates remain shut. You can imagine a boy who delivers amphorae to shops, each jar heavy enough to make his shoulders ache, about 20 litres, a little over 5 gallons, stopping daily to press an ear to the bronze, just in case the god behind it has something to say. He hears only the low hum of the forum, the bargaining of butchers, the news shouted like weather. He grows up, opens his own stall, grows old, dies. The doors never move. The silence is not cruel, it is simply persistent. Meanwhile, learned men scratch parchment. One quotes an older historian to prove when the doors closed, another quotes a poet to prove that poets are unreliable, which is true and also rude. A third leafs through marble fragments and tries to fix the shrine's exact footprint, arguing about paces and paving lines, as if mapping an omen to the half-foot will solve it. Historians still argue whether the late antique gate was repaired, repurposed, or ritually ignored, whether the medieval city even remembered its precise spot, whether the phrase Gates of Janus slides around from one structure to another, the way names sometimes do in long cities and long memories. The debate is lively in the way academic debates are polite on the page, muttered with extra adjectives over wine. Add superstition to scholarship and the brew thickens. A priest warns that forcing a sacred threshold is like stepping on your own shadow. You can do it, but you will not enjoy the consequences. A stonemason jokes that he could pry one leaf an inch with a wedge the size of a loaf, but he keeps his wedges wrapped, and his jokes soft because even masons prefer not to test gods after dark. A child ties a cord from jamb to jamb like a tiny barrier, and declares the door doubly sealed. Her grandmother smiles and does not correct her because everything important is practice for something larger. 3 light jokes float through the quarter. First, that the city keeps the gates shut to save on hinge grease. Second, that peace likes being measured in doorways because it can leave quickly. Third, that if the doors ever swing again, the first sound will be the collective gulp of tax collectors, realizing they must recalculate everything. And still, the metal rests. If you stand here long enough, you realize the curse people talk about is mostly an echo, the human habit of assigning fate to objects until the objects acquire their own weather. The gate did not swallow armies, it merely watched them go. The gate did not shatter empires, it merely reflected them in bronze. But because it once claimed to mirror Rome's pulse, its long stillness feels like a diagnosis. The empire learned to breathe without moving the mouth that used to announce its breath. So the night deepens, a breeze skims the stones. Somewhere behind you a vendor shutters a stall. The wood clicks like a small verdict. You let one hand rest on the cold seam where the 2 leaves meet, and feel the temperature of stories cooler than your skin, warmer than indifference. The city is both asleep and listening. Thresholds do that to people. They make them lean forward and backward at once, like the god whose name is carved above the arch. 2 faces, 1 city, a long silence that somehow keeps speaking. The streets of ancient Rome do not take kindly to uncertainty, and when the gates remain sealed after the emperor's disappearance, rumours begin to rattle down alleys faster than loose cartwheels on cobblestones. Senators march through the forum with their togas wrapped tight, whispering under their breath, as though marble statues might be listening. Citizens lean against olive stalls, bread stalls, even wine counters, trading theories the way modern people might trade memes. One merchant insists the gates were locked, because the emperor had sinned and the gods wanted nothing more to do with him. Another shakes his head, certain that foreign enemies had bewitched the hinges, poisoning the bronze, with a spell that only time itself could break. The effect is not unlike when your neighbour swears his cat is possessed because it stares too long at the wall. In both cases, the logic is thin, but the confidence is unshakable. As days stretch into weeks, the sealed gates become a physical metaphor. Rome prides itself on control aqueducts, channel water legions march in strict formations, taxes flow like clockwork. Yet here stands a monumental set of doors that refuses to obey. People point at the iron-bound panels and shake their heads, muttering that if even the emperor could not keep a gate open, perhaps the empire itself is more fragile than the marble suggests. A mainstream fact remains clear. Roman ritual often depended on physical gestures, opening or closing doors, lighting fires, even shaking spears before Jupiter's temple. For a symbol to fail meant that the ritual failed, and for the Romans failed ritual was as ominous as a missing paycheck. Meanwhile, scholars of the time scribble furiously, each hoping to control the narrative. One chronicler claims that the gates were never meant to open at all, that they were enchanted by Numa Pompilius, Rome's legendary second king, to remain sealed unless war threatened the city. Another quill wielder suggests that the gates are alive, slumbering like some bronze dragon, choosing for themselves whether to open or close. Historians still argue whether these accounts were genuine belief, or literary invention. After all, chroniclers loved a good flourish more than they loved accuracy. And if accuracy paid fewer coins than drama, why not lean into drama? The courtiers inside the palace are no better. A chamberlain nervously counts the bolts again and again, as if rattling metal could somehow unlock mystery. A scribe mutters that he saw a shadow pass across the gates at midnight, though no torches burned nearby. Servants tell one another that the Emperor's voice still echoes faintly near the hinges, as though he has become part of the metal trapped forever in bronze. It is a chilling image, a man of flesh turned into an echo reduced to a whisper every time the wind rattles through cracks in the stone. A quirky tidbit emerges here. Roman artisans occasionally cast human teeth or small animal bones into bronze for luck. So when someone whispers that maybe a piece of the Emperor himself is in the gate, no one laughs too loudly. Outside, the people cannot resist theatricality. Street performers invent plays about the gates, one comic pretending to strain against invisible hinges, while another wails that the Emperor has shrunk himself into a mouse to slip through the cracks. Children pick up the game, pressing their ears to the metal and swearing they can hear tiny footsteps on the other side. Of course, what they actually hear is the hollow groan of bronze cooling in the night air, but children prefer stories to metallurgy. To be fair, so do most adults. As the tension grows, the gates become a pilgrimage site. People shuffle toward them in dusty sandals, touching the cold surface, as though contact might transfer some clue. Priests arrive with incense burners swinging them slowly, while chanting prayers that smell more like cinnamon than sanctity. One priest declares loudly that the gates will only open when Rome itself is pure, which prompts one cynical bystander to ask whether that means never. The crowd laughs nervously and the priest glares, but the joke lands because everyone knows that Rome is as corrupt as it is glorious. The military becomes uneasy as well. Generals mutter that an emperor disappearing is bad enough, but sealed gates suggest divine displeasure. Soldiers refuse to camp near them, insisting that the hinges groan in their sleep like the cries of dying men. One officer writes to his superior that morale will collapse if the gates remain locked too long. Another suggests tearing them down entirely, though this idea is quickly hushed. Destroying a sacred object would risk angering gods and citizens alike. After all, Romans were perfectly happy to stab each other in the Senate, but they thought twice before poking bronze that might house a deity. Meanwhile, foreign envoys in Rome smirk at the spectacle. A Greek visitor records in his diary that the Romans boast of conquering nations yet tremble before their own door. It is a jab as sharp as any spear, and it circulates in whispers stinging pride. The irony is unavoidable. Rome, the conqueror of Carthage and Gaul, now brought low by a piece of architecture that refuses to budge. If doors could laugh, these gates would be howling. In the background, philosophers use the event as an excuse for debate. One Stoic lecturer insists the sealed gates prove that humans control nothing but their minds. Another Epicurean chuckles that maybe the gods locked the gates to remind everyone to eat, drink and enjoy themselves before disappearing like emperors do. The crowd chuckles too, half because it is witty, and half because the wine is already flowing. Philosophy in Rome was as much entertainment as enlightenment, and the gates provide an irresistible metaphor. Night after night the gates remain unyielding. Torches flicker, guards shuffle, prayers rise, but nothing changes. The silence becomes heavier than iron, pressing down on the city, until even casual conversation feels weighted. And yet the people cannot turn away. The gates are no longer just bronze and wood. They are the stage on which Rome projects its fears, its faith, and its flaws. As one late poet sighs, a gate that will not open is not a gate but a mirror. Perhaps he is right, for in staring at the sealed doors the Romans are forced to stare at themselves, and what they see unsettles them more than the disappearance of any emperor. The gates of Janus stand silent, their bronze faces gleaming faintly in the shifting light of Roman skies. For centuries their opening or closing tells the people of Rome whether their empire is at peace or in war. In theory it is a simple mechanism open when legions march out to battle close, when swords rest in their scabbards. In practice though, those doors become a kind of cosmic switchboard, signalling far more than military campaigns. They symbolize the empire's state of being. People walking past the forum do not need an official decree when they can simply glance at the temple's doors and know whether they should be sharpening swords or enjoying figs in the marketplace. It is as if a glowing red sign is hung on the empire itself. Do not disturb, currently fighting. And Romans, practical as ever, take this visual shorthand very seriously. The mainstream historical fact is this: Augustus, the first emperor, boasts of closing those gates 3 times during his reign. That number is remarkable. Before him, the gates of Janus had been closed only twice in all of Rome's long republican history. Twice. Across centuries of battles, treaties and civil strife, only 2 moments are calm enough for Rome to declare the whole world at peace. Augustus seizes on that symbolism and makes sure everyone knows about it. His Res Gestae, the autobiography he engraves in stone for posterity, lists the closing of the Janus gates as one of his great accomplishments. It is like bragging on a resume, except instead of Excel proficiency, he can write "Achieved global peace, you're welcome." But already in Augustus's careful record-keeping a problem lurks. Peace is not always as clear-cut as bronze doors swinging shut. Rome fights skirmishes on borders even during supposed peace years. Pirates harass trade ships. Governors stir up local rebellions. The idea that the whole empire is simultaneously free of war is frankly more wishful thinking than reality. Historians still argue whether Augustus's claims of peace are genuine or a masterstroke of propaganda. After all, if you are controlling the narrative, why not polish reality until it gleams like newly cast bronze? As centuries roll on, the gates take on layers of meaning that go beyond military status. Senators invoke them in speeches. Poets slip sly references into their verses. A quirky tidbit from Ovid's Fasti describes Janus himself as the god who looks both forward and backward, past and future, and so the temple doors become associated with cosmic cycles as much as with earthly conflicts. If the gates remain sealed, it suggests Rome has reached a rare alignment with the gods, a kind of divine harmony that ordinary citizens whisper about when they pass through the Forum. Of course, as with all things, Roman politics gets in the way. Emperors who want to advertise their strength emphasize the times they close the gates, declaring themselves bringers of peace. Those who thrive on military conquest make a point of keeping them open, ensuring that Rome never forgets that legions are on the march. The gates are like a giant Instagram status for the empire, carefully curated, occasionally misleading, and always subject to interpretation. Imagine the ordinary Roman citizen walking past the Forum during one of those supposedly rare times when the doors are shut. The market bustles, children play knucklebones in the street, and vendors shout about fresh olives. Peace feels tangible, like a soft blanket over the city. But behind that calm facade lies tension. What if some frontier explodes tomorrow? What if Parthian horsemen are already massing beyond the Euphrates? Rome is a superpower, yes, but it is also a superpower stretched thin, and everyone knows it. The closed gates become less a declaration of certainty and more a prayer whispered in bronze, may peace last just a little longer. The symbolism of those doors is so strong that even centuries later, medieval chroniclers mention them with awe. To them, the gates are almost magical objects, ancient relics that embody the shifting tides of fate. Some even write as though the gates themselves possess power, that by swinging closed they force peace into existence, and by opening they unleash chaos. Rational or not, the imagery sticks. Doors are easy for human minds to grasp. Open equals danger, closed equals safety. It is like a cosmic light switch that everyone can understand without reading Senate decrees. But here is where the puzzle sharpens. After the reign of Augustus, records of the gates grow sporadic. We know they open and close at times, but the details blur. Chroniclers forget to note them, or perhaps emperors simply stop making a spectacle of them. Then somewhere between the late Empire and the Middle Ages, the references stop almost entirely. The temple remains, the bronze doors still stand, but they are sealed and not reopened for what some sources claim is 15 centuries. Imagine a lock being turned, and then time itself gathering dust on the key. The quirky story that sticks to this long closure is almost comical. Medieval writers describe the gates as having been walled up with bricks, not simply barred, as though Rome herself decides to bury the very concept of war under mortar. Whether that literally happens is debated. Historians still argue whether the gates are ceremonially sealed or physically bricked. But the imagery is powerful, Rome, exhausted by endless campaigns, finally saying, "Enough. Let's just lock this thing and throw away the key." Meanwhile, the common people never stop talking. Rumours ripple through the centuries that if the doors of Janus ever open again, it will herald the end of days, a final war that swallows the world. Parents warn children in lullabies, sleep soundly, for the gates are closed and safe. Pilgrims visiting the ruins of the Forum centuries later whisper that the silence of the doors is heavier than any trumpet of war. The gates move from being a physical object into becoming myth, a symbol not just of Rome's peace, but of humanity's fragile hope that war might someday stop rattling its chains. And yet, like all things, Roman certainty remains elusive. Were the gates really closed continuously for 1500 years, or is that just a neat story embroidered by later writers? Did later emperors quietly open them without bothering to record it? Historians still debate this, shaking their heads over gaps in the sources, wishing the scribes had been just a little more consistent. But perhaps the very ambiguity is the point. A mystery thrives when details are fuzzy. The less we know, the more we speculate. And the more we speculate, the more those bronze doors become larger than life. So the sealed gates of Janus transform from an imperial barometer into a legend that stretches across ages. They are not just metal and hinges. They are memory anxiety and imagination cast in bronze. Their silence hums louder than any fanfare. And as the centuries pass, the weight of that silence only deepens, pressing on Rome, pressing on history, pressing on us who listen centuries later and still wonder what it means for a city to close the doors of war and never open them again. The Forum never really sleeps, it just lowers its voice and changes the lighting. By the time dawn rinses the marble clean, the rumour has already set out tables of its own that the gates of Janus are still bolted, that peace has been declared by decree the way bakers declare loaves done by smell. Merchants in indigo and russet roll out cloth beneath awnings and talk less about prices than about door hinges. Fishmongers slap silver bellies on wet boards and mutter that peace ought to smell better than today's catch. The square, which usually hums with buying and selling, hums harder, with watching and whispering like a theatre audience, waiting for a curtain that refuses to rise. A mainstream fact steadies the swirl in Roman custom. The Temple of Janus stands open in wartime and shut in peace. Numa Pompilius is credited with the rule, and Augustus, never shy about good press, counted his rare closures as loudly as a stadium announcer. Coins, arches, inscriptions, the boast echoes everywhere. Yet now the bronze leaves are sealed again, and everyone knows the empire's borders still itch. A veteran points his chin toward the shut passage, and says half to himself that silence can clang louder than iron. Historians still argue whether this locking is genuine confidence, or a scarlet theatre curtain thrown over scaffolding. Street talk grows ornate in minutes. A smith swears he saw smoke curl down from the pediment, not up, as if Janus exhaled a sulky sigh. A perfumer claims the air along the threshold carries a note of bitter myrrh no one ordered. One boy insists that if you press your ear to the bronze and count to 100, you hear distant marching, either legions returning victorious, or creditors coming to collect. He has not decided which is scarier. The joke lands a little, and drifts away like the scent of spilt oil. Senators in saffron-edged togas move toward the curia, in clumps, heads close, voices lower than the doves. Their sandals whisper over stone in unhappy harmony. They rehearse arguments like actors: the doors must open, or else we look weak. The doors must stay shut, or else the people lose heart. One calculates the angle of sunlight on the lintel, roughly 30 degrees, by his very serious thumb, as though geometry might unlock policy. Another talks tariffs with panic hidden under vocabulary, because when you cannot control the frontier, you at least try to control the price of grain. A third peers at the temple, as if it were a legal text with a missing line. Down in the crowd, a baker jokes that his ovens work harder than the legions. A vintner replies that his barrels march straighter than governors, which earns a chorus of appreciative groans. 3 light laughs per 1,000 words is a reasonable ration, right. Still, the humour runs thin quickly, when soldiers in polished cuirasses drift past the laughter seals itself like a purse string. Peace is lovely in poetry. In practice it looks suspiciously like men with spears. Vendors adapt with shameless grace. A charm seller lays out little bronze keys and claims they fit any hinge that wants the truth. A lamp maker offers double-wicked lamps for nights when one flame is not enough to see what emperors are doing. Children test the temple steps, hopping from the 3rd to the 5th as if some secret pattern might trigger a whisper from the god. Their mothers haul them back with that look which has not changed since the Bronze Age. Inside a nearby basilica, scribes scratch wax with angry efficiency. One copies a senator's flighty proposal to proclaim a festival of peace so convincing that even tax collectors will smile. Another drafts the counter-case which argues that festivals without pay for soldiers are like garlands without stems. A clerk sketches the temple's facade, noting dents near the lower hinge, and adds a tiny figure cupping an ear to the seam. His friend leans over and murmurs that future readers will think that figure is him. The clerk smirks, because that is exactly the plan. Historians still argue whether such sketches prove civic anxiety, or simply good office gossip with better penmanship. As afternoon picks up heat, a priest of Janus appears with attendants carrying a shallow tray of honey cakes. He sets them at the threshold. One for each face says the temple gossip in an undertone, as if Janus needs 2 mouths to chew. A quirky tidbit clings some shopkeepers swear they hang tiny wreaths of fig leaves on door frames when Janus is ill-tempered to sweeten the hinge. Today fig leaves sprout everywhere, a city-wide attempt at pacifying bronze. The priest murmurs prayers so softly the words melt. For a long breath, the square seems to listen with him. Nothing moves except pigeons negotiating jurisdiction. Toward evening, a small deputation forms merchants with measured tones, a matron with steady eyes, a veteran who walks like he still hears drums. They approach a tribune stationed near the steps and ask the question, everyone is chewing, is Rome truly at peace? The tribune's answer is a polished stone, smooth, satisfying, and impossible to bite. Rome is as peaceful as the gods allow, he says, adding a smile thin as a knife's shadow. The delegation nods as citizens do when they have received exactly the number of answers they expected 0. In the taverns, the story grows new arms. One patron claims the hinges have been anointed with a secret resin that muffles divine voices useful for ignoring bad omens and mother-in-law advice alike. Another swears that a senator's nephew dropped a coin into the crack and the door spat it back out hot. A juggler smelling faintly of lamp oil says the emperor plans to keep Janus shut until every border post can be measured to the last pace about 100 metres, roughly 328 feet between milestones, he declares with the certainty of a man who has never seen a milestone. The room applauds anyway because confidence is its own evidence after the second cup. Twilight paints the columns with diluted wine. Musicians set a slow rhythm on frame drums. A girl sells sprigs of laurel and whispers that wearing them tonight keeps double-faced gods from peeking into dreams. A pair of scholars already dusty with quotations stage a debate 15 paces from the threshold. One insists the closure is a philosophical act, Rome choosing internal harmony over external bravado. The other maintains it is a misdirection worthy of stagecraft. They agree on nothing except that someone should buy the next round. The server agrees with both. And when night finally climbs the steps, the doors hold. They do not groan, they do not glimmer, they simply remain. Torches throw moving bars of light across the bronze, as if the city has set a second set of locks made of fire. Somewhere a fountain keeps its patient syllables. Somewhere a cat patrols like a minor official with lifelong tenure. Rome settles, but the settling is uneasy the way a sleeper turns on a pillow that remembers other heads. The gates of Janus stay sealed and their stillness becomes a sound everyone hears a hush that keeps promising to break and does not. In the echoing silence that follows centuries of ritual, the gates of Janus stand like mute witnesses. Bronze doors meant to clang with authority remain stubbornly shut. Around them the forum bustles with life, but the sealed temple seems to carry its own weather, a pocket of chill air that refuses to lift. Senators stride past in their russet cloaks, pretending not to glance through their eyes stray. Merchants set up stalls nearby, hawking saffron-dyed cloth and teal-dipped glassware, but they speak more quietly when the temple looms in sight, as though a whisper might tempt the hinges back into life. Even children slow their games when they pass the shadow of those gates, unwilling to bounce a ball where wars were once announced and peace declared. The mainstream fact is plain enough: the Temple of Janus was tied to Rome's state of war and peace. When the doors were open, it signified Rome was engaged in conflict somewhere across its vast dominion. When closed, which was rare, it meant the entire empire was at peace, a condition so unlikely it was celebrated like a solar eclipse. Augustus himself boasted of closing the gates multiple times, using the moment as a propaganda jewel to dazzle his subjects. Yet the late empire faced fewer such theatrics. With borders constantly restless, peace rarely arrived at the full measure required to bolt Janus's doors. So when the temple did close, it carried a weight of meaning that could anchor 1,000 rumours. The quirky tale that clings to this moment is that the gates were sealed not by decree, but by sheer neglect. Chroniclers whisper of a janitor who lost his keys, or a priest who fell asleep mid-ritual and forgot to swing the doors open when a campaign began. Another version insists the hinges grew so rusted that no human hand could force them, and so people concluded it must have been the will of the gods. Historians still argue whether these colourful details represent actual memory, or the later embroidery of a city that adored gossip as much as it adored bread and circuses. On one twilight evening, a senator pauses before the gates leaning on his staff. He He murmurs that perhaps the gods themselves are weary of Rome's endless wars, that Janus has sealed his own temple out of disgust. His companions chuckle nervously, but the idea gains traction. Rome is a city where metaphors become policy, and soon others repeat the thought. If Janus has turned his back, perhaps the Empire must reckon with what that means. The notion that stone and bronze could possess willpower seems absurd to us, but in an age where omens determined battle plans, it was less strange. Meanwhile, artisans use the sealed doors as inspiration. They sketch the bronze panels into mosaics, they carve miniatures into amulets sold in wicker baskets at markets, and they embroider Janus' two faces into cloaks dyed in indigo and saffron. These trinkets carry both reverence and ridicule. A merchant jokes that if you hang one over your doorway, it might keep debt collectors out as effectively as it kept peace in. Another insists the amulet hums at night, though he admits after 3 cups of wine that the hum may come from his snoring donkey. The tension thickens when foreign envoys arrive. Ambassadors from Gaul, Hispania and Africa are ushered through the forum, and they cannot help but notice the sealed temple. Whispers slip into their letters. Home, Rome's gods are silent. Her gates rusted, her omens unclear. A single image travels faster than 1,000 decrees, and the image of locked bronze begins to ripple outward. Historians still argue whether these reports influenced revolts in the provinces, but one cannot dismiss the power of symbol. In a city where statues collapse under ivy, yet still command respect, the silence of a temple speaks volumes. At night, the gates seem to glimmer under torchlight, as though the shell gold of centuries past still clings to the edges. Guards mutter about footsteps near the threshold when no one is present. A priest claims to have seen vapour rise from the cracks between the doors, a pale mist that smelled faintly of myrrh. Skeptics scoff, yet even they lower their voices in the shadow of those doors. No one wants to tempt the god of thresholds into showing his displeasure. A mainstream ritual fact adds to the unease. Janus was invoked at every Roman beginning, every contract journey or campaign. To have his own house closed felt like a paradox, a beginning that had somehow ended itself. The people adapt the story into daily life, as people always do. Mothers warn their children not to loiter near the temple, lest Janus snatch them into silence. Street performers compose verses about the emperor losing his own keys, earning laughter, but also side-eye glances from guards. Vendors sell pastries shaped like little gates, 2 pieces of sweet dough pressed shut with honey glaze. One taster jokes that it is the only gate in Rome guaranteed to open if you have strong enough teeth. Humour is a shield, but also an admission of discomfort. Scholars pore over the symbolism, drawing comparisons to earlier myths. Some say the closed gates echo the drowned bells of distant seas, both silences that carry weight heavier than sound. Others draw parallels with the Antikythera mechanism, whose gears turned invisibly for centuries, until rediscovered machines of meaning lost to time. And still, historians argue whether the gates closed by policy accident or omen. Each theory finds defenders, none proves decisive. By dawn the forum fills again, sandals slapping across marble cloaks fluttering in the wind. The sealed gates stand unchanged, patient as stone, bearing the scrutiny of generations. Children chase hoops past them. Senators rehearse speeches near them, and lovers pause in their shadow. The gates do nothing, and yet in their stillness they perform the greatest drama of all. They remind Rome that certainty is as fragile as bronze hinges. The silence in Rome after weeks of absence does not feel like stillness anymore. It feels like a weight pressing against the chest of every senator, soldier and citizen. The cursed gates remain shut as they have for centuries, yet suddenly their symbolism grows unbearable. People whisper that the emperor's disappearance and the sealed bronze doors are connected, as if one lock on a palace chamber echoes another lock hammered into the forum. They walk past the temple where the gates crouch in shadow, and they avoid looking directly at them the way one avoids staring too long at an open grave. It is said the hinges had not turned since the reign of Augustus, or perhaps later, but the exact date fades into confusion, as though history itself joins the conspiracy of silence. The fact remains, the gates stand unopened bronze jaws that will not part. A clerk, eager to reassure nervous petitioners, reminds them that the Romans once had a ritual tied to those gates. They were the doors of Janus, god of thresholds, and in ancient times they were flung open in war and shut only when the entire empire stood at peace. The ritual was rare because Rome truthfully almost never stopped fighting. Augustus himself boasted that he shut the gates 3 times, a mainstream fact carved into his Res Gestae, his official brag sheet inscribed on stone. To hear of a closed gate was like hearing of a unicorn trotting down the Appian Way. Improbable, but delightful when true. And yet after those few moments the gates sealed again, and the hinges began their long rust into eternity. People say they are cursed because no emperor since has dared to swing them open. Scholars still argue whether the curse was theological or political. Was it the priests who quietly decided never to perform the ceremony again, fearing divine backlash, if they pretended peace existed where it clearly did not? Or was it the emperors reluctant to admit they could never achieve the impossible, namely universal calm across all provinces? Either way, the bronze doors became more legend than reality. The silence of Janus' shrine mirrored the silence of the missing emperor's chamber. 2 locks, 2 absences, both gnawing at the Roman imagination. In taverns, jokes take on sharper edges. A wine seller leans across his counter and whispers that the emperor has been swallowed by the gates themselves, drawn into bronze the way flies vanish into amber. His customer laughs too loudly, then glances nervously at the temple as if half afraid the doors might suddenly shudder and speak. Another man claims the hinges are smeared with blood each new moon, an offering from priests desperate to keep the curse contained. No one believes it entirely, but no one dismisses it entirely either. In a city where crocodile dung was once trusted as sunscreen superstition, can always find an audience. Meanwhile, senators wrestle with metaphors. A poet writes that the empire itself is like those doors closed stiff, unwilling to move forward. Another compares the missing emperor to Janus himself, a two-faced figure slipping between past and future, neither here nor gone. The imagery spreads quickly because people cling to any explanation that feels poetic. A locked door is easier to imagine than a vanished sovereign. When news is scarce, metaphor fills the void. A quirky tidbit surfaces from a soldier stationed near the temple. He swears he once pressed his ear against the bronze and heard faint music like distant pipes playing beneath the metal. His comrades laugh and say it was the wind, but he insists the sound had rhythm. Some scribes record the anecdote, and centuries later it will reappear in Chronicle's footnotes for those who delight in fringe tales. If true, it suggests that the gates are more than props in a city's mythology. They are instruments humming with secrets. Night deepens the eeriness. Torches flicker across the forum and shadows of the gates stretch like long thin fingers toward the paving stones. A stray dog barks and an old woman mutters that even the animals sense the curse. Children are warned not to play near the temple after dusk lest Janus himself snatch them into his shadowed corridors. The story spreads into lullabies half threat and half comfort, because parents know fear can sometimes hush a restless child. Historians still argue whether the gates' closure symbolised Rome's pride or its decline. One side insists that leaving them sealed meant peace had become impossible, that the empire was too entangled in perpetual war. Another side claims the gesture was propaganda, an attempt to pretend stability while the walls trembled. Both sides agree on one point: the gates outlived the emperors who ignored them. Bronze lasts longer than flesh, and silence outlasts memory. In the city, fear sharpens. A smith hammers nails into his workshop door, muttering that if the emperor can vanish, and the sacred gates remain locked, then nothing in Rome is secure. A baker sets aside a half-loaf as an offering near the temple, hoping the gods will spare his oven from misfortune. A senator's wife refuses to pass the forum at all, sending servants instead. The curse grows in the telling, as curses always do. One evening, when dusk stains the sky, saffron, a procession of priests approaches the temple with incense. They chant softly, circling the gates, waving bronze rattles and sprinkling wine across the pavement. Some citizens watch with reverence, others with mockery, but all lean in for a glimpse of movement. The priests raise their hands as if preparing to push the gates outward. The crowd holds its breath. Then at the last moment they step back, bow, and leave the doors untouched. The message is clear: better to feed rumour than to tempt disaster. The cursed gates remain sealed, the emperor remains missing, and Rome hums with unease. A locked chamber, a locked shrine, and a city locked in rumour, each door heavier than iron, each silence deeper than words. The night closes in, and the people return to their homes, wondering if tomorrow the bronze might groan open at last, or if it will continue its watchful hush for another 15 centuries. The rumour that the gates of Janus were sealed for 15 centuries takes on a life of its own, passed from monk to merchant, from parchment to performance. In candlelit scriptoria, scribes laboriously copy chronicles, pausing sometimes to add marginal doodles of gates with locks the size of cauldrons, as though exaggeration itself could hold back chaos. Meanwhile, in marketplaces, minstrels strum lutes and tell wide-eyed audiences that the Romans chained shut the doors with iron forged from fallen meteors, metal so hard it could bind war itself. The children giggle, the adults nod and nobody bothers to fact-check, because medieval storytelling has always thrived on imagination, rather than on footnotes. What begins as political symbolism in antiquity mutates into legend embroidered with layers of superstition and folklore. And like all good stories, it grows in the telling until even sober chroniclers wonder whether truth is being shadowed by fable. In those centuries, Europe is restless, the Mediterranean a soup of competing powers. Crusaders tramp eastward, kings jostle over crowns, and farmers pray for harvests that do not wither. Yet into this mix slides the comforting idea that somewhere, somehow, the cursed gates remain locked, guarding the world from the eruption of violence. Historians still argue whether medieval clerics sincerely believed the myth, or merely used it as a sermon hook, but either way, the image of bronze doors sealed with dust has traction. A mainstream fact anchors the tale the Janus Temple, once located in the Roman Forum, was by the Middle Ages mostly rubble, its true form forgotten. Still, that absence only made room for invention. A ruined site is like a blank canvas waiting for monks with quills to paint visions of gates no army can break. Quirky details creep into regional variations. In Gaul, some whispered that the gates were kept closed not by bronze but by angels standing watch, their wings crossed like living beams. In England, minstrels sang that Arthur himself once leaned against the doors, checking that no hinge creaked before riding back into mist. In German lands, the story folded into winter fables. Villagers said the gates could be heard groaning under the weight of snow, as though cold itself was another form of siege. Each culture twisted the image to fit its own anxieties, making the gates not just Roman, but universal. If you were anxious about war plague or famine, the thought of magical gates keeping trouble away was an oddly soothing bedtime story. Of course, reality was far less stable. Medieval chronicles record endless wars, knights hacking through one another's banners in muddy fields, cities stormed and burned, crusades that promised salvation, but delivered confusion. Against such chaos, the vision of gates locked tight must have seemed deliciously ironic. Imagine trudging through mud in iron-shod boots, hearing a preacher claim that war had been chained in bronze for 1,000 years, and wondering whether someone had misplaced the key. That gap between myth and mud produced both laughter and fear. People knew life was dangerous, yet they still clung to the tale, because clinging to anything feels better than clutching nothing. One manuscript from a Florentine library paints the image vividly. On a page otherwise filled with psalms, a monk sketched the gates as twin towers with fiery locks, above which angels hovered with trumpets. Below, peasants huddled together, eyes wide, as though the very act of drawing the gates gave them a protective aura. Was the monk doodling during a dull chant, or was he consciously embedding theology into art? Historians still argue whether these visual embellishments reflect true belief or simply artistic whimsy. Either way, they reveal how deeply the idea of sealed gates had infiltrated medieval minds. The myth was not background noise, it was a melody sung across generations. And here comes one of the lighter jokes. In taverns, drunkards muttered that if the gates really were locked, perhaps someone had thrown the key into a chamber pot, and good luck to the poor fellow who tried to retrieve it. Others claimed the key was hidden in Constantinople or Paris, or somewhere in a papal treasury mislabeled as miscellaneous bronze. The humour allowed people to laugh at the absurdity, even as they nodded gravely during sermons. In this way, the gates served double duty, solemn in church, comical in alehouse, a flexible myth that could be dressed up or stripped down depending on the company. The sealed gate motif even seeped into legal and political language. Decrees warned that opening conflicts unlocked the Janus doors, and poets scolded kings by suggesting they had jiggled the hinges of divine peace. Ordinary villagers, meanwhile, described quarrels in the marketplace as cracking the bronze, transforming a broken egg sale into a cosmic event. Language shows belief, and belief shows power. The gates had become shorthand for everything unstable about the world. If you wanted to condemn war, you invoked Janus. If you wanted to bless peace, you praised the gates for staying shut. The myth was practical, portable, and endlessly repeatable. One quirky fringe story insists that in the year 1204, when Crusaders sacked Constantinople, the gates were rumoured to have rattled audibly in Rome, even though no stone structure remained. Chroniclers record that frightened monks claimed to hear bronze clanging at midnight, as if the doors themselves were protesting the sack of a Christian city. Skeptics smirk, suggesting the sound was just church bells blown by wind. Believers, however, nodded, solemnly convinced that the myth was alive, vibrating in sympathy with the world's turmoil. Either way, the story proves how eagerly people sought cosmic metaphors for human violence. By the late medieval centuries, the gates had shifted fully from history into archetype. The ruins in the Forum were mostly ignored by busy merchants, but the tale was alive in ballads and sermons. To open the gates was to invite catastrophe. To keep them sealed was to preserve hope. Rome itself might be crumbling stone by stone, but in the imagination of Europe, bronze doors still loomed, glowing faintly with supernatural authority. And so the story stretched forward, ready to be reshaped by Renaissance dramatists, Reformation preachers, and modern skeptics alike. The clergy, ever vigilant for moments when mystery could be transformed into moral teaching, seized the disappearance of Valentinian III like a preacher clutching a pulpit. In basilicas, lit with wavering lamps, bishops thunder from marble platforms that the emperor's vanishing is no accident of politics but a divine warning. They declare that when rulers grow negligent of piety, heaven removes its shield. Parishioners sit hunched on wooden benches, the smell of incense thick in their noses, listening as if the walls themselves tremble at the pronouncement. For ordinary Romans, already anxious about barbarian raids and rising prices, the sermons confirm what they feared, that the empire's foundations are shaking, not just from human weakness, but from God's displeasure. Some priests take a softer approach. Instead of thunder, they speak of mercy. One homily suggests that the emperor was spared further sin removed gently from the world before corruption could deepen. The comparison to Elijah rising into the heavens without death spreads quickly, though whispered with nervous laughter, because of course Valentinian did not ascend in a fiery chariot, but in what seemed like silence. Still, the story comforts those who long to believe that absence might be protection rather than punishment. Families leaving church clutch such tales like charms, muttering them again over bread and olives at supper. Monasteries also play their part in reshaping the narrative. In cloisters tucked behind high walls, monks in russet or indigo habits spin fanciful notions that Valentinian has exchanged imperial purple for their woolen robes. One scribe even pens a tale of the emperor milking goats at dawn, fumbling with the teats, while chanting psalms under his breath. It is an image at once absurd and strangely comforting, reminding weary Romans that even emperors might crave simplicity. Historians still argue whether such accounts reflect genuine belief or just playful invention, but they endure because they lighten the heaviness of uncertainty. The clergy's stories mingle easily with daily rituals. Candles are lit in chapels not only for the safety of families, but for the lost emperor, as though prayers could anchor him wherever he has gone. Pilgrims travelling dusty roads repeat rumours at roadside shrines, shaping the tale anew at every stop. A pilgrim might insist that Valentinian is walking disguised among them, carrying a staff carved with a cross blessing those he meets in secret. Another swears he saw a ragged figure in saffron robes kneeling beside a well-murmuring prayers too refined for a mere peasant. Whether imagination or hallucination, the accounts spread because people prefer the possibility of hidden presence over the emptiness of confirmed absence. Church art also absorbs the mystery. Mosaics depicting emperors are suddenly painted with subtle gaps, a throne empty but glowing with gold tesserae, or a cloak shown fluttering with no body inside. Viewers gaze and shiver, seeing not only art but allegory power itself is transient even when framed in marble and glass. One mainstream fact underlines this. Roman religion had long tied imperial authority to divine favour. To lose an emperor in unexplained silence shakes that link, and preachers are quick to claim it proves divine displeasure. Yet others quietly argue the opposite, saying, perhaps God hid Valentinian to shield him until Rome's sins were cleansed. The debate never settles, only thickens. Quirky tidbits pepper sermons, often straddling the line between humour and terror. One bishop known for dramatics insists that the emperor was plucked away because he once mocked a relic. Another swears that bells toll faintly beneath the Tiber at midnight, proof that the emperor's soul now lingers with drowned spirits. Parishioners lean forward, half sceptical, half enthralled, because even the strangest images carry weight when uttered in the echo of holy halls. The clergy's narratives ripple outward beyond the city. In North Africa, sermons suggest Valentinian was taken as punishment for failing to defend grain fleets against raiders. In Gaul, homilies compare him to the collapsing vineyard signs, that Rome's sins spoil both wine and rulers. In Constantinople, priests smirk while warning that the West's emperor disappeared because he ignored the true orthodoxy proof, at least in their telling, that God favoured the East. Each region bends the mystery into a mirror of its own concerns. Ordinary believers carry the weight of these interpretations into their daily lives. Mothers hush children with warnings that disobedience could make them vanish like the emperor. Fishermen crossing rivers trace protective signs, muttering prayers against being snatched like Valentinian. Merchants hang small bronze keys from stalls sold as charms said to lock their bodies to the earth, so no divine force could lift them away. A half-kilogram trinket about £1 buys a little peace of mind, and so superstition thrives where certainty cannot. Even skeptics admit that the Church has a genius for weaving mystery into ritual. The Emperor's vanishing becomes part of vigils, part of Lenten sermons, even part of feast day jokes. One preacher lightens the mood by suggesting Valentinian left, simply to escape bad singing at Mass, earning a ripple of laughter that soon fades into sighs. After all, humour often rests on fear, and the laughter here tastes faint. Historians still argue whether the clergy genuinely believed these mystical versions or merely used them to reinforce authority. Perhaps bishops saw in the emperor's absence an opportunity to remind their flock that no earthly throne is secure, only the throne of heaven. Perhaps monks genuinely dreamed that the ruler prayed among them disguised and humble. Whatever the truth, the narratives multiply like vines, and once entwined with liturgy, they cannot be pruned. By the time weeks have turned to months, the Church's voice ensures the mystery is no longer only political but spiritual. The emperor who once ruled by sword and decree now rules by absence, invoked in sermons, prayers, and whispered warnings. And perhaps that is the clergy's greatest triumph, transforming a crisis of state into a lesson of faith, binding fear with ritual until it feels almost holy. Practical voices, less dazzled by incense and allegory, lean toward explanations rooted in politics and human ambition. In Rome's marble halls, a senator wrings his hands not over divine judgment, but over grain shipments from Africa. Without the emperor to sign edicts and send orders, who guarantees that the vast supply chain of wheat measured in amphorae of 20 litres each, or a little over 5 gallons, will continue smoothly? The senator whispers that Valentinian must have been kidnapped by Vandals spirited across the sea to Carthage, a hostage worth more than treasure. Yet others scoff, noting that no ransom demand has arrived. Fear, however, does not require parchment proof. It thrives on repetition, on the murmured, perhaps shared over clay cups of watered wine. Soldiers, always quick to suspicion, add their own harsh theories. Around campfires in the campus, Martius legionaries sharpen swords and mutter that perhaps the emperor was slain by rivals inside his own palace, his body hidden under marble slabs. They nod grimly at each other, recalling other rulers, poisoned, stabbed, ambushed, and reminding themselves that an emperor's skin is no more iron than their own. Still, one grizzled veteran shakes his head and swears that if such a thing had happened, some guard would have slipped news by now. Historians still argue whether silence proves conspiracy or whether it proves nothing at all. Merchants add layers of speculation between selling figs and oil. A trader from Hispania claims that Valentinian was smuggled onto a ship, disguised as a monk bound for Alexandria where philosophers might shelter him. A Syrian caravan master swears he heard in Antioch that the emperor had traded his purple for a merchant's robe, setting up shop far from Rome's demands. Each story carries a kernel of practicality, the knowledge that power often tempts men to flee its burdens as much as to seize them, and each tale sells well in markets where rumour is as valuable as coin. The taverns, as ever, echo with louder voices. Sailors pound their mugs, each mug holding about a litre, or a little more than a quart, and insist that foreign spies must have spirited the emperor away. Only a fool would believe otherwise, one declares, though his words wobble with wine. Another laughs that if Valentinian is indeed at sea, he must be sick over the side by now, because everyone knows the emperor despised voyages. The joke earns guffaws, though. Beneath the humour lies unease. If even the emperor cannot endure the waves, what stability can anyone expect from the empire's ship of state? Practical fears ripple into everyday life. Senators reinforce villa gates, hiring extra guards with polished shields and spears. Priests remind congregations that the bells toll for warning, not for comfort. Beggars invent prayers to Jupiter, to Christ, to any god who might reveal the missing ruler's fate. Even children join in drawing chalk graffiti of winged emperors flying above the rooftops, half mockery and half anxious charm. Rome, always noisy, becomes a city where every echo feels like a clue, every silence a threat. Quirky tales sneak into the record, too stubbornly defying sober explanations. One minor chronicle claims the emperor was poisoned with herbs that made his body dissolve like wax in fire. Another whispers that he was swallowed by the very mosaic floor of his chamber, pulled beneath as though the marble had jaws. Most people laugh, but not too loudly. In a world where crocodile dung had once been touted as sunscreen stranger, things had been believed. Even skeptics recognize that absurdity can be as persuasive as logic when fear gnaws at the edges of reason, Amid all this, the machinery of empire groans forward. Armies must still march, taxes must still be collected, and judges must still pronounce sentences. Yet the absence of Valentinian makes every act feel provisional, as though the empire is being ruled by shadow. The Senate debates endlessly, some calling for succession, others begging delay. Historians still argue whether the hesitation sprang from genuine loyalty, fear of civil war, or simple confusion. Whatever the cause, the uncertainty spreads like cracks in marble, small at first, then branching, widening, threatening collapse. For ordinary citizens, practical concerns remain the loudest. Will grain prices rise without the emperor's oversight? Will barbarian raids increase if legions doubt their orders? Will taxes climb higher to fund rival claimants? The vanished emperor is not only a mystery but an economic variable, and that makes him more terrifying than a ghost. Rumour becomes currency traded with the same urgency as bread and oil. Rome learns once again that politics is not confined to palaces. It lives in taverns, in markets, in every whispered bargain. By the month's end, the practical explanations have not replaced the mystical ones, they have joined them. A senator's fear of lost shipments sits beside a bishop's sermon of divine punishment. A soldier's mutter of murder blends with a monk's tale of secret renunciation. The empire collects explanations the way it collects taxes, unwillingly, unevenly, and with little sense of fairness. And in this mingling of reason and superstition, Rome discovers a truth that is both uncomfortable and enduring. Sometimes the most practical explanation and the most fanciful one share equal weight, not because they are equally true, but because neither can be disproven. The centuries roll forward, and Valentinian's absence takes on the weight of permanence. At first, Rome waits with nervous hope, sure that an emperor must reappear as predictably as the sun rises over the Palatine Hill. But weeks become months, and months begin to fade into years until the missing man is no longer a person to be found, but a riddle to be repeated. His disappearance lingers in the city's memory like incense in a basilica, faint but stubborn, clinging to walls and rafters long after the smoke itself has dispersed. The emperor is gone, but the mystery remains, and in many ways it grows larger than the man himself ever was. Contemporaries offer metaphors to anchor their unease. A senator mutters that Valentinian was plucked away like grain before harvest, an image that stings in a city utterly dependent on African wheat shipments. Another likens the event to a colonnade collapsing without warning, silent, steady, then suddenly rubble. Ordinary Romans feel the shock more personally. If an emperor can vanish from his own palace, how can a baker trust that his stall will still stand tomorrow? How can a mother be sure her child will return from market? Rome is already pressed by barbarian raids, failing revenues, and fraying loyalties. Valentinian's absence crystallizes all those threats into one unforgettable image, a purple robe without a body inside it. Historians still argue whether this symbolism was immediate or slowly built by centuries of retelling, but either way it endures. As generations pass, different regions embroider their own colours onto the tale. In Gaul, poets say the vanished emperor is proof the West has lost divine favour. In Africa, merchants make grim jokes that he was misplaced like a shipment of amphorite, 20 litres each, or a little over 5 gallons lost at sea with no refund. Byzantine scribes, never shy about belittling their Western rivals, claim that the gods simply cleaned the imperial register of an unworthy name. And yet even they keep the story alive because mystery, like trade goods, ignores borders. Taverns keep the legend lively with outlandish twists. One favourite has Valentinian abducted by barbarians disguised as acrobats, who juggled their way past the palace gates. Another insists he donned gladiator's armour, and vanished into the arena tasting a freedom denied to emperors. A mocking version claims he tripped on his overlong toga, toppled into a cistern, and was never pulled out again. The audience laughs, but the laughter is edged with worry. Beneath every joke lies the same pulse. If the head of the empire can disappear in an instant, then perhaps the empire itself can too. The church folds the mystery into sermons. Preachers thunder that Valentinian's fate is a warning from heaven, a reminder that rulers who neglect faith may be seized without notice. Others offer gentler readings, claiming he was spared future sins, carried off like Elijah, but without the fiery chariot more puddle than pyre. Pilgrims whisper his name as though it were half relic, half ghost, uncertain whether to mourn him as a sinner, or honour him as a saint undone by mystery. The ambiguity becomes its own lesson that power, no matter how gilded, remains fragile before the unseen. Scholars cannot resist turning the puzzle into metaphor. One likens the emperor to the Antikythera mechanism, intricate, confounding, forever spinning in shadows. Another compares him to the drowned bells of the Adriatic herd, but unseen tolling without a source. These flourishes reveal more about scholarly appetite for puzzles than about Valentinian himself, but they ensure the tale's survival. Every time a historian toys with the mystery, they feed it more longevity than marble statues or weathered coins could ever provide. Medieval chroniclers reshape him into a moral warning. Kings are told guard your palaces, for even emperors may be swallowed whole. Renaissance dramatists cast him as a tragic figure undone not by war but by silence, a ruler conquered by absence. Later ages invoke him whenever authority falters, pointing to his disappearance as proof of power's fragility. Each retelling softens and reshapes the wax of the tale, stamping it with the seal of the current age's fears. Ordinary people hold the memory closer to the chest. They light candles in chapels, whisper prayers for their own security, rather than for the emperor's soul. Some claim to hear faint bells during vigils tying his fate to other maritime legends. A humble cup of wine, half a litre just over a pint, becomes a comfort as families debate whether his absence meant wrath rescue or sheer chance. Parents warn their children to behave, for even emperors are not safe from sudden removal. The story enters the rhythms of daily life, domestic as much as political. The centuries polish the tale until it gleams with contradictions. Was Valentinian murdered in some shadowed corner? Spirited away by conspirators? Did he trade imperial purple for anonymity, wandering as a beggar or a monk? Each possibility reveals less about him and more about the people retelling it, their fears, their hopes, their hunger for narrative. By ceasing to exist visibly, he comes to exist everywhere imaginatively. Statues crumble, coins corrode, but mysteries renew themselves each time they are spoken. Now imagine the final settling of dusk on marble steps. The palace grows quiet, guards unsure whether to wait or sleep. The Adriatic lies still as polished stone holding drowned bells and secrets beneath its surface. The emperor who vanished does not need to return. The mystery is his legacy, and it is enough. Rome continues, the empire totters and falls, but the story persists. Some truths lie beyond reach, yet their echoes cradle us all the same. And now, let the pace soften, like shadows stretching gently over evening streets. The tale of Valentinian fades, not with a bang, but with a hush, the kind of silence that settles deep into the bones of a city. Imagine the corridors of the old palace, once ringing with sandals and commands, now stilled their stones cool beneath the weight of centuries. No footstep breaks the quiet, no voice calls an order. Only the faint whisper of time itself moves through the arches, smoothing sharp edges into memory. Breathe in slowly as if you were taking in the cool night air drifting from distant hills. Hold it for a moment, then let it go soft and unhurried. Picture yourself not as a historian chasing answers, but as a listener drifting toward rest, letting the mystery serve not as a question demanding solution, but as a lullaby with no end. The bells you have heard about all evening, the drowned ones, the imagined ones, the ones that toll without a source, now toll softly for you. They do not scold, they do not warn. Their rhythm is steady, gentle, like a pulse beneath the earth. They ask nothing of you except to let go. So let your shoulders ease, let your thoughts wander like lanterns set afloat on a slow river. The Romans carried stories across centuries. Tonight you need only carry yourself into calm. The emperor's mystery belongs to history now, but peace belongs to you in this moment. Drift with the bells, drift with the silence, and let sleep wrap around you as tenderly as the night.